Olli, thank you very much for coming. You've just been at the ECB conference. You're on your way back home. So thank you for taking the time to stop over. Maybe we can just start with a big picture view of Europe. We've had important EU parliamentary elections. The next 48 hours here in Brussels are incredibly important. The leaders here are sorting through the leadership positions. How do you interpret the EU elections, and how do you see the next 48 hours here and what comes out of it?
Thanks for asking, and good morning to everybody. Great to be back in Brussels on my way from cool Portugal to warm Finland by the lake in the sauna this evening already. Looking very much forward to that. Anyway, the European elections included several messages, and I would have, say, 2 or 3 takeaways from that. First, the voter turnout was actually quite good. We had, for the first time, rise in the voter turnout. There was a significant mobilization of voters, and for instance, in Germany, the voter turnout increased by over 10 percentage points. That's certainly positive. Second, the populist forces made some gains, Eurosceptic populist forces, but there was no revolution, and they will not dominate the European Parliament. And the third takeaway is that the Liberals and Greens made gains, and this means that the 2 dominant parties, the European People's Party and Socialists and Democrats, will not together have a gross coalition. They don't have a simple majority in the European Parliament anymore, which means that there has to be 3 or 4 parties in a coalition to, say, lead, run and manage the European Parliament, which is an important force, of course, in European policy making, and which will impact the decisions concerning the Commission leadership and subsequent policies.
And what do you think the top priorities should be and will be as we see a new Commission?
I think there was a very clear message from the voters that climate change and ambitious, bold, but consistent climate and energy policies are needed. Second message of the voters was that we need to solve our refugee and immigration issues. What I would hope, and I think it's very important for Europe, and I hope this audience will agree with me, is that we would need more emphasis on the economic and industrial renewal of Europe. And in this regard, the next Commission, I hope, will have an ambitious program concerning how to complete the single market in services, in the digital field, and also how to continue the good work that has been done by the Juncker Commission as regards trade policy. We have made quite significant strides in agreeing new regional or bilateral trade agreements, which is actually countering the trend of trade wars, which is currently prevalent between the US and China.
And banking union, capital market union, also a priority?
They are certainly a priority, and say the unfinished business of the economic and monetary union or the Eurozone construction is or should be one of the priorities for the next Commission and also for the member states, because in many ways the member states hold the keys as regards issues like completing the banking union or taking further steps in finalizing the capital markets union in order to enhance investment and growth in Europe.
You mentioned you were just in a meeting in Portugal, the ECB. I must say I was a little surprised when President Draghi gave a fairly dovish set of remarks, which interestingly elicited a fairly rapid response from the President of the United States. I can't remember the last time the President of the United States immediately tweeted in response to an ECB speech. It's a new territory, so who knows? But I was surprised at the fairly dovishness of Mario's comments. Are you concerned about the trajectory of the European economy?
I am concerned about that, but at the same time, it's important to underline that we are not forecasting any recession, but yes, we have had lingering slowness in the European economy, and the softer patch has been longer than many perhaps expected, and therefore we are in the Governing Council of the European Central Bank, we are ready to act as appropriate unless there is improvement in the economic conditions, and then we are ready to use all our instruments as appropriate.
President Draghi famously said a number of years ago, we'll do whatever it takes. Probably one of the most seminal moments of his tenure as the head of the ECB. Have we become too reliant on that mentality, that posture of we'll do whatever it takes? Are we too reliant on the ECB specifically, or central banks generally, to be the provider of liquidity and support for the economy?
Well, the central banks do what they got to do, but at the same time, and our main goal is our mandate and our objective is to ensure that we meet the price stability target, and that's our mandate. Having said that, at the same time, certainly we would welcome and call for action from the member states and other actors. In other words, both fiscal policy and structural reforms should help to revive the European economy. And what I'm particularly concerned about is the medium to long-term growth of the European economy, because that would call for investment in innovation and research, would call for bold economic reforms in the member states so that we could enhance productivity and thus living standards in a sustainable way. This fundamentally would make also the work of the central banks or the European Central Bank in a way easier, and it would not excessively burden the central banks so that they would not have to be the only game in town or the only active player in the field.
To your point, I saw President Draghi at Jackson Hole after that, a year or two later, where he said, we're happy to do what we're doing, but we need structural reform. Is structural reform happening fast enough? And at a certain point, should the ECB say, enough is enough, it's on you fiscal authorities, it's on you policymakers to take on the tough assignments. You can't continue relying on us and QE to solve your problems.
We continue to advocate bold and consistent policies of reform and investment from member states. But at the same time, in the end of the day, our mandate is defined in the EU treaty, and that is, I may repeat myself, but take that only as a sign of consistency. It is price stability, and as long as our prime objective of price stability is achieved, our supporting mandate is to help other objectives of the EU, like balanced, strong growth and full employment. This is the logic we work with, and we will only essentially focus on our mandate, which is the price stability target.
Let's talk a little bit about price stability. We've seen extraordinary monetary policy in this cycle from the ECB, from the Bank of Japan, even from the Fed, yet all the central banks seem to have a challenging time meeting their inflation targets. The Phillips curve seems to have disappeared. We thought we would see an increase in wages and in prices. That hasn't happened, certainly in the US. Why do you think that is? What has changed? What is different about the world that didn't meet with your expectations and our initial models?
I think this is precisely one of the reasons why I have been calling for a review of the ECB monetary policy strategy, which is actually being done in the US by the Federal Reserve for the Fed's purposes. And the background is that we have several economics puzzles, dilemmas for the moment in the current new normal, especially related to issues like the low natural rate of interest. What is behind that? Our understanding currently is that it is very much related to demographic change or population aging. There are other factors as well, probably like economic globalization and labor mobility within Europe, which is having an impact on wage inflation. So all this merits a thorough, in-depth economic analysis of the reasons behind the current low inflation, low interest rate environment, and thus provides us enough analytical raw material to draw conclusions on which basis we can then ensure that our monetary policy is effective in the medium to long term. Now we have short-term challenges which are related very much to the, say, prolonged pervasive uncertainty, mainly due to trade tensions or trade war, especially between the US and China. And we have to be ready to react to economic conditions in relation to that context. But in the medium to long term, we have to also analyze deeper the environment and have dialogue with the academic community, with the business community, with the trade unions and other stakeholders in the civil society at large.
You know, to your point about low interest rates, there is a growing debate in the United States that deficits don't matter. We're running deficits of 5% of GDP, close to 5%, $1 trillion a year. That juxtaposed to modern monetary theory, which says it doesn't matter, you can print as much money as you want as long as you're borrowing your own currency. How do you think about the current posture toward fiscal policy, even in Europe? Is it too tight? Is it too loose? Should we do something different? Should we be investing? And what do you think about modern monetary theory?
Well, modern monetary theory feels sometimes a bit postmodern for me. And it is maybe taking generalizations from certain very specific conditions. In Europe, we have, as we know, we have had a very challenging sovereign debt crisis after the financial crisis. Now we have recovered that in the past 6 years. We have created 10 million net new jobs, and we have had recovery and growth ongoing for the past 6 years. These better economic times are still, in most cases, better to be used in order to build buffers for worse economic times, like we are advocating in our country, Finland, where we have the latest forecast is for this year still 1.6% economic growth. Having said that, I can see that the low interest rate environment provides room for productive investment if the interest rate is lower than growth rate. But at the same time, I think we have to treat very carefully that we avoid any deficit bias in the medium to long term. So if the member states who have fiscal space could use that fiscal space for productive private and public investment, that would certainly support growth and sustainable growth and job creation in Europe. And that would be certainly something to be recommended.
And pan-European initiatives like the Juncker plan, do we need more of that? Was that a success? Do we need to replicate that? Or is there something similar to doing that in an integrated fashion?
I think the Juncker plan has been one of the successes of the Juncker Commission. And it was preceded already by the capital increase of the European Investment Bank in 2012-2013. And this European Fund for Strategic Investments has provided very substantial funds for investment in sustainable finance for SMEs and many other purposes, which has supported growth over the last couple of years. And I think it would be important that the next Commission would review the success and lessons learned of this plan and if possible, would continue and perhaps expand this kind of investment plan, because we have a deficit of investment in Europe for the moment, and with this kind of public investment bank like the European Investment Bank, which is, by the way, the largest development bank in the world, we could greatly help to reduce this investment deficit.
We'll have the EIB here later this afternoon. You mentioned trade tensions. You're a central bank governor, which means you're paid to worry. Is that your biggest concern? And is it U.S.-China tensions that cause you the greatest concern? And do you worry about the U.S. current administration turning its attention to Europe and potentially focused on autos, for example?
The trade tensions are certainly the greatest worry for the moment, and they are creating a prolonged presence of pervasive uncertainty, which is felt already also in Europe in terms of investment or reducing investment and difficulties in the manufacturing industry. And that's why, of course, we are all eagerly looking at the meeting between Presidents Trump and Xi in the context of G20 in the end of this month. So I think it would be very important for the world economy that everybody would do their best to avoid any escalation of the trade war, and rather try to solve the problems we are facing in a constructive negotiating manner.
Setting aside the bombast of the tweets, is there some value to some of the positions that maybe the U.S. administration or others have taken with respect to, I won't pick a particular country, but does the global trading system need some reforms? Despite the tactics to getting there, do we need to find a way forward?
Definitely we need. And if you look at the past 10 years of, the crisis years and its aftermath, so the IMF has been able to reform itself, and it has maintained and in fact reinforced its relevance in the past 10 years. Meanwhile, the World Trade Organization is unfortunately in difficulty to maintain its strong role in the world free trade regime, and therefore I believe it's very important that both Europe and the United States in a constructive and ambitious manner try to reform the WTO so that it better serves the purpose of providing governance in the multilateral trading system.
I completely agree with you. Let me take one of the questions that's come in from the audience, and please use your app to send questions. It says, are small member states adequately protected in Europe, both in rulemaking where France and Germany are deciding the path, and in supervision where pressure is coming to reduce host powers to benefit a small number of large institutions? Do you worry about the power sharing, the power arrangement? Are small states adequately protected in the decision-making process in Europe?
There is a very nice saying by the former Icelandic president, Vigdis Finnbogadottir, who said that there is no such thing as a small nation. And I believe this is important also in the context of the European Union, that we are if not in the decision making, but in terms of policy making and providing solutions, we are all equal in that sense. Besides, as you may know, the European Union is composed of 27 or 28 member states, composed of 27, 28 small states or states that have not yet realized that they are small states. So only in unity we can achieve something in the world which is increasingly dominated by G2, which doesn't include Europe in the current context, i.e. dominated by the US and China. And the current trade tensions which are in fact, say, the surface of the economic and technological power struggle between the US and China are an example, a very concrete and a topical example of this. So yes, we need unity. At the same time, in a way, if you take another kind of look at Germany and France, I wish that Germany and France could, in fact, better cooperate in order to find concrete solutions how to reinforce, especially the Eurozone, right, and reform the economic and monetary union. But not alone. The European Commission has to be providing initiatives and all member states should be on board in this. But the fact that Germany and France are not necessarily working very well together in this regard is not to the benefit of Europe. I would very much hope that they could work better together, and that's why I think it's important that we try to build bridges between Germany and France concerning economic thinking and finding solutions to reform the Eurozone and in other fields so that we can work for an economic and industrial renewal of Europe.
We'll take one last question on monetary policy, and then I want to get to the climate agenda, which is incredibly important. Given favorable credit conditions, would QE be favored over rate cuts as a tool to raise inflation towards its target?
Sorry?
Given favorable credit conditions, would QE be favored over rate cuts as a tool to raise inflation towards target?
This is the question which was posed by several journalists in Sintra. And,
maybe they're here today. Maybe it's
I could suspect. I could bet it's one of the two agencies or one of the three agencies, basically. But I will disappoint you in this sense because I believe in collegial working methods, and we will discuss and then decide what kind of policy response we will take in our forthcoming meetings in plural, and then we will keep in mind that the overall impact of any policy measures is stronger than only a certain part, one or another part of it, and that's why the whole toolbox, the whole range of instruments is on the table. And if I repeat that we will consider enhanced forward guidance concerning rates and asset purchase program. We will consider further rate cuts of policy interest rates, which would be accompanied with mitigating measures, and we will also consider resuming net asset purchases because there is still headroom in the asset purchase program. So we will consider the whole range of instruments within our toolbox in our forthcoming meetings.
Great answer. Let's turn to climate in our closing couple of minutes. Ascendancy of the Greens across Europe, the importance of climate. The Nordics have been leaders. I was in Oslo recently. They told me 60 or 70% of all new autos in Norway, for example, are electric vehicles. Nordics have been leaders on climate. What role should the financial services industry, and banks in particular, play in transforming the European economy to a greener, more sustainable economy?
Thanks for asking this. This is very close to my heart. I'm a proud owner of the first edition of the report called Our Common Future, 1989. That's the Brundtland Commission, which defined yes, the three pillars of sustainable development. And I think it's very important that we have seen already very significant positive moves within the financial industry, and sustainable finance and principles towards sustainable finance are increasingly become mainstream. For instance, the central banks have recently set up a network of central banks for greening finance.
Right.
And we are trying to work together with the financial industry in order to enhance such rules of the game that will enhance and increase sustainable finance by the private sector, which is key in the end of the day. So let's work together in this regard. between the central banking community and the financial industry.
I just met with the Secretariat for the Network for Greening the Financial System in Paris on Tuesday. We're an important partner in that process. Our institutions are eager to continue to move to a greener environment. Lots of opportunities out there. We do need a global approach. I worry about fragmentation, that certain jurisdictions proceed at certain pace versus others. But we're a willing partner with you on that, and I look forward to working with you. Governor, thank you for taking the time here today. I know you're on your way home. We greatly appreciate it. Ladies and gentlemen, please give him a round of applause.
Thank you.